one thing we get in the comments is about the what people call the vanilla skies, the white skies. And you understand film and photography a lot better than me, and you have solved this mystery. So I'm going to hand it over to you, man. Walk me through it.
And even I myself am by no means a professional or have as big of an understanding of it as I possibly could compared to a professional photographer. So the way that this film works is the sensitizing dyes were designed to pull the color red on the spectrum is shadow. The exact opposite color of red on the color spectrum is purple. Blue is right next door. Photography is painting with light. Human skin color, doesn't matter what race you are, shows up as red on the color spectrum. So this early film was designed to pull reds as shadows. That way, the shadows show up on film, and the blue shows up as white. Therefore, the skies show up as white. That's photography 101. Ever since Vanilla Sky came around, there has been zero attempt from any of these Tartar advocates to take the time to educate themselves on that matter and to then do what you're supposed to do, which is go and debunk that. Debunk this science behind the sensitizing dyes. Now, as celluloid film evolves, you get to the point where panchromatic film comes out. Panchromatic film is also black and white, but you see the development of the sensitizing dyes get to the point where they can now register blue and pull details. So when you search panchromatic film photography online, you can see images of clouds in the sky, as well as all the shadows, which is the red spectrum of the color spectrum showing up as shadows. Basic photography.
So I hadn't actually looked into this orthochromatic photography before me and you started talking. So you put me onto this. And just to back up what you're saying, it says here that photography has indeed advanced since the good old times. And what the good old times means here is that when photographs were sensitive primarily to the blue region of the spectrum, and you go down, and it's exactly like you're saying, until the 1870s, the good old days, it was generally accepted that blues would appear lighter than greens and reds. And orthochromatic photography refers to a photographic emulsion that is sensitive to only blue and green light and thus can be processed with a red safe light. And as this type of film was not sensitive to red light, it increased the blue sensitivity that causes blue objects to appear lighter or whiter. And that goes back to what you're saying, because blue and red are opposite ends of the spectrum. So I think for me, that's enough of an explanation. That makes sense. The sky's blue and it's oversensitive to the blue spectrum, so it's coming out lighter. So the skies are white. But that won't be enough for most people. So we should be able to test it. I've got up 4 photographs in GIMP. Now in GIMP, you can desaturate and do a mono mixer. So you turn the image to black and white. And these are my photographs. Now we're going to turn our blue and green up and our red down. That looks like a 19th century photograph. And as you can see, the sky has gone white. If I undo that, the clouds have gone. This one, again, turn the blue up and the green and the red down. Sky has gone white. It looks like a 19th century photograph. Turn the blue up, turn the green up, and turn the red down. There you go. The sky's disappeared. And it looks like a 19th century photograph. Wouldn't you agree?
It's all pretty simple when you do the research.
And that's the thing. It's like this. That's why this has to be correct, because you can actually test this. You just go into the mono mixer, you turn them all up, and you turn the red down. That's pretty much, that is pretty much a 19th century photograph, isn't it? That's what we're seeing. And that's it. And this is really what I mean when I keep saying that it's argument from incredulity. Is it to argue that there's some sort of photo manipulation going on because the skies are white? It is ignorance because you don't know, or I didn't know, about the processes of early photography. And then once you learn, and it's the same with the exposure times and people disappearing and people moving, because once you know that, it makes sense. And there's no mystery anymore. And that's a good thing because then we close that down.
It's never going to be closed down anymore.
Never. It's never gone. It's just like, oh God, it's endless. That's the thing. We need to talk about the photo manipulation as well, don't we? Because that's something that comes up a lot, that the 19th century photographers could photo manipulate, a bit like we can today with Photoshop.
Everyone's always going to be creative with whatever form of art exists. So I think in this term of photo manipulation, photo cropping, it all has to be taken on a case-by-case basis. I myself have seen photos that have been trimmed, manipulated, if you want to use that word, altered. But a good example of looking at that would be the music industry. If you hear a song where an artist uses auto-tune, it doesn't mean that every single song uses auto-tune. It's a case-by-case basis. So I don't think we can just conclude that every photograph has been manipulated and there's a worldwide conspiracy, because yes, we do have a select amount of photos that appear to have been edited.
Yeah, and it's a bit like this one here that's been cropped. I mean, it's quite easy to take this out of context and say, oh, look, it's evidence that they've messed with the construction photos. But I suppose the first thing to say about this is that it's actually, we've got clouds. It's not a whitewashed sky. So there's that. This actually goes back to what you're saying about a case-by-case basis, because this belongs to part of a larger archive. If you go through, you get more images, and you can see there's an image in the background here. You can see there's, I think you call them awnings. It says 80DS, blah, blah, blah. So this is a photograph on top of another photograph. And as you go through, that's that original image. There's other forms of cropping. So, you know, this was probably just cut out when the photographer was doing it. It doesn't mean these are fake. And another thing to say about photo cropping, you know, I took this photograph and I can easily crop it and mess around with it. But it doesn't mean I didn't actually take the photograph and that this structure does not exist. It just means that they, like us, were trying to make a better image all the time or playing around with them. You know, whether it was being doctored for a magazine or a journal or an advert. So I don't think that's enough evidence. They need to be looked at individually on a case-by-case basis.
With this example that you're showing, case in point, just because you're cropping the sky, it has nothing to do with the foreground of the photo. So if there is evidence of a photo that's been cropped, it's a selective area. It's not the whole entire photo.
But, you know, with that said, they did have photo manipulation back in the day. So this is actually a composite image. It's manipulated. This guy wasn't actually there. And you can see with the horse, I mean, it looks very fake. And there were loads of these type of things, you know, double head. So this is playing around with that exposure.
And this process can be done through the camera at the time of the photo, if I'm not mistaken. But you can also do this in the darkroom. You cover up certain parts of the photo paper. You expose it to the film through light, and then you do the other side. And this could be two different pictures that were taken, two different exposures onto the photo paper in the red room, and bam, you have a manipulated photo.
Yeah, exactly. So this was the sort of thing they were doing. You got ghost images and funny stuff like this, blowing his head up. And this is a renowned fake. So yeah, it did exist back then, just like it exists today. Doesn't mean every single photograph is faked, but also as well, I mean, if you're arguing for the Tartarian hypothesis, using photo manipulation in the 19th century is not going to work in your favor. You're actually shooting yourself in the foot. And I'll explain why, because the thing is, if you're arguing that all construction photos have been photo manipulated and they're fake, then why stop there? So there are a few photographs of empty cities or empty scenes. Well, how do you know if they could manipulate photos so well? How do you know they didn't just remove all the people to make a better image? And it's the same with the empty construction sites. When we see an empty construction site, how do you know they didn't just remove all the people? Because if they were that good at photo manipulating, you can't just cherry pick with it and say that, oh, they've manipulated the construction photos because it suits your argument. It means that every single photograph is now vulnerable to that same argument. And here you could say, well, where are all the people? Or maybe they just removed them to make it a better image. They didn't actually. If you zoom in, you can see the blurs, the exposure. But you get my point. And it's the same. It's the same with the World's Fairs. It's that how do you know the World's Fairs actually look like this? This could be a fake photograph. And really, when you think about it, this does actually look quite fake. This looks like an advertisement, for the fair to make it look dreamy and amazing. And I'll show you why. I mean, yeah, because this is the same structure and this is in the archives and there's 3,000 images of this World's Fair being constructed and you can see all the timber, you can see the plaster, but this looks like this is a more realistic image in my mind. This looks more real than the other image. You can see all the details. So really is cherry picking. Those photographs of all those lovely buildings that are not here anymore. Well, how do you know they ever existed? Maybe those photographs are fake. If they're faking photographs so much during that period, maybe it was just propaganda, tourist propaganda to make a city look better than it was so people would visit or move there. So yeah, by arguing that the construction photographs are manipulated and fake, you then create an invalid argument, It invalidates your entire window into the past. You can't just claim that all construction photographs are fake without any substantial evidence, but then believe an image of a seemingly empty city taken with long exposure and use it as proof of a reset. It's cherry picking.
It was actually pretty comical. I was watching Campbell of Autodidactic, and he was getting kind of frustrated because he was trying to understand that how a long exposure time has anything to do with the sky in a photo turning white and the building in the foreground turning black. And I totally get his frustrations because that's like me going up to a toaster and putting bread in it, walking away, coming back 5 minutes later and be like, hey, why don't I have any toast? You have to understand how the toaster works and you got to push down to get the toast. The long exposure decides how much light enters the camera and stains the film. The sensitizing dyes I was speaking of earlier, that decides what turns to light and what turns to shadow. So if you leave the exposure open for too long, the whole entire photo is going to turn out white because you let too much light in. So my humble opinion is before you go on the record, maybe just take like 20, 25 minutes to research a topic, because otherwise you kind of come out here looking like Joe Biden, all confused, like, I don't know which way to walk. Educate yourself.